working on a mic, but I'm loud, so. Okay. It's just all right. Sorry that I'm up here. We're connected to an HDMI, otherwise I'd be closer to you. All right, so septic solutions. Another preface. Unfortunately, you'll realize that every time I say anything, I have to add 15 appendices. So, this presentation was originally conceived of as a two-parter. There was an initial phase which was going around, and we went around to local governments in Antrim County and gave functionally these two presentations. Part one being, what is a septic system? How does it relate to water quality? And part two being, here are management options. I know that not all of you are coming from Antrim County. However, I am going to skip to part two, which is a little bit more directly relevant, and part two being the management options. Before I go forward, I understand that this is a bit of a call out. Would anyone like me to do a quick septic system overview? I love to do a turd talk. All right, moving on. So, all right, so septic systems and how it relates. So, the Clean Water Act has largely addressed many of the issues associated with point source pollution. Point source pollution being a stationary source has a discrete conveyance, or something like a pipe or a ditch that is ending up where pollutants from a source are ending up in a body of water. Many of those systems have now been brought into compliance, which means that the major contributor of pollutants to our waterways is now non-point source pollution, or pollution that is coming from these sort of disparate sources. Frequently we think about it as agricultural runoff, right? You're applying pesticides or fertilizers to fields, rain comes down, ends up in a ditch, ends up in Lake Erie, suddenly there's an algal bloom. This also can come from many other sources. So recreational opportunities for your car. Motor oil getting into waterways is not a major issue, but is a source of pollution, right? And faulty septic systems are one of the non-point source pollution sources that we are working to address. And so one of the things that you are going to receive from us is going to be a document with additional resources. Part of those resources are going to be the Elk-Skegemog Lake Watershed Management Plan. This is going to look at addressing those non-point source pollution sources from a watershed level scale. So I want to make sure that you're understanding this within the context of there are other sources of pollution, and there is a watershed scale mission to address these, and this is looking at a subset of that, and we're specifically looking at septic systems. Septic system failure is linked to fecal contamination in systems of water. However, I do want to sort of take the step and say a septic system that is properly installed and maintained and is relatively young is protecting your body of water. There are studies that have said, look, if your septic system is working, you're fine. You're not polluting the water. However, if your septic system is failing or faulty or has been improperly installed such that it is right next to a body of water, so your drain field doesn't have time to process those pollutants, you are going to end up with that septage in source water. So we are specifically linking septic failure to water quality. And a 2015 Michigan MSU study looked at 64 rivers in Lower Michigan, and of these studied systems of water, all of them had fecal contamination. It's not to say that all water has fecal contamination, it's just that when they looked for human biomarkers, they found those biomarkers in all of those systems of water. And bacterial concentrations were highest where there were higher numbers of septic systems in the watershed area. So we're making that logical connection between if you can manage those septic systems, you're going to increase water quality. From here on out, it gets kind of dry. I apologize. It's policy world. I will do my best to not make it torturous. So you have policy options to consider. Maintaining the status quo, having having a mandatory pumping ordinance, having a mandatory inspection ordinance, looking at, and so those are looking at it on a periodicity scale, where every 5 years, every 10 years, you need to have it pumped or inspected. Or you can associate that pumping or inspection with the sale or transfer of a home. You can look at short-term rental ordinances, which include septic provisions. You can say, look, we don't want to deal with this septic issue at all. We would like to move to a sewer system. Or you can say, there should be septic legislation, but we think that it needs to be uniform across our area, and we believe that a statewide solution is the answer. So, maintaining the status quo. This is going to be your easiest option. There's going to be no changes in oversight or in policy process. Septic systems that are potentially failing may cause increased health impacts, but many systems will be properly maintained and updated, right? The health department still does exist. If you're having septic backups into your home, somebody is going to come look at it. Maintaining the status quo is not the house is on fire necessarily. There is a system in place to make sure we are addressing failures, but many of these older systems will go uninspected and unmaintained. And there are older homes that may be in something like a trust that may never really get inspected, right? Then there's a mandatory pumping ordinance. The goal is to prevent or delay septic system failure by ensuring periodic pumping. So this is not saying someone is going to come into your home and make sure that that system is working properly. It's just saying you as a homeowner have an obligation to maintain that system. This is going to require collaborating with local septic haulers to ensure that the scale of the program is feasible. One of the concerns associated with the statewide septic bill is that many systems are not currently being pumped, and if they were, we do not currently have the space to stick the sludge. That is one of the things that we have to address, is there the infrastructure to address that increased demand? Then there's a mandatory inspection ordinance. Inspections or evaluations will be regularly conducted or overseen by the health department within a specified time period. Again, looking at this from a periodicity, every 5 years, every 10 years. The homeowner would only be required to do what is appropriate for their particular system, and remedial actions may be suggested or required by the health department. Then a time of transfer ordinance. This tends to be the most popular option for administration by local government. The inspections are conducted at the time of sale or transfer. It ensures that a home buyer is going to know that their septic system is working. We conducted a survey of home buyers, and there was a great deal of positive feedback from those home buyers. So bringing people into your community because they know that the property that they're buying is going to maintain that value. They're not taking on a huge risk because their septic system isn't working properly and they just don't know it. If a system is found to be failing or near the end of its effective life, a plan for remediation is required, and follow-up inspection may be required to ensure compliance or to complete the inspection if the sale happens during winter. I will note realtors are kind of iffy on this one. There's a lot of concern within the realtor community, especially within lobbyists, that it will delay the sale of the home. From Milton Township, it doesn't look like it's like 8 days of delay average.
Our overall inspection is about 21 days and 3 weekends.
Yeah, so it does not dramatically delay the sale of the home, and it does provide that value for the home buyer that they have a working septic system, and it is good for general communities to know that systems are being inspected and brought into compliance. I will note that this does leave out homes that are not sold for generations. If you allow transfers within a family, that cottage on the lake that has a septic system, which is really a 55-gallon drum, may not ever get updated because no one is ever looking at it. Short-term rental. Health Department of Northwest Michigan has identified short-term rental properties as a partially because, one, short-term rentals tend to be adjacent to bodies of water. If you're coming up here, you probably want to go swim in the lake, and you are probably gonna bring your friends. So you may have more guests than that system is designed to handle, so that outsized use of an undersized system may cause premature failure of that septic system, and failure of that septic system is going to be adjacent to the lake or a river system. So it tends to be low-hanging fruit. If you want to have a short-term rental ordinance, you are more likely to capture the high priority parcels that need to be brought into compliance. So one way you can do this is by, one, limiting the number. Does this work? Oh. Alright, this can check against septic failure by, one, limiting the number of guests based on the tank size, or two, by requiring the homeowner to have an inspection on file. Both of those are going to make sure that that septic system is now not being overburdened. 6, the sewer system alternative. It is typically established through a special assessment district. It can be initiated either by property owners or by the local government, but I will note that this is a lengthy process with strict procedural requirements. So if you do decide to go the sewer alternative, it is going to be a project. And I'm also going to note that the Watershed Council does not have a board-approved policy on septic versus sewer. And so I can't come to you and say, yes, for your community, this is definitely what you should do to protect water quality. If you do have that question, feel free to come chat with us and we can look at your specific situation. We will definitely be reaching out to the health department to get their opinion. But I wanted to note that while this is an option to consider, I don't have a cut and dry answer for you on this alternative. And finally, this is sort of, okay. We're gonna get to option 7 in just a second. So before I move on to the statewide regulations, I want to note the importance of collaboration. So this is an important first step. We're all hanging out in the room together. But for any septic ordinance to be successfully implemented, local health department inspectors and septic haulers must have the capacity to implement the required inspections and pumping. And it's really important to have those conversations early on to make sure that if you're going to pass an ordinance, not only is it going to accomplish what you want, but the infrastructure and the capacity exists to make sure that that can be successfully implemented. And then I alluded to this at the beginning, but while the state has been working on this for decades, we still do not have a statewide code, statewide septic regulations. The septic working group is meeting approximately weekly in Lansing to try to hammer out some legislation. The plan for that is to introduce it to a committee in February. So just to give you a sense of the timeline, they are actively working on it, but it is not yet finalized. But even given the work that's being done at the state level, there are currently existing gaps. And so there is a need to address these systems. And the question is, how do you, as local regulators, want to address this problem? And that's it for me. I'm gonna come off this stage. But while I go through the little hallway there, think of any questions that you want to ask, and then if you don't have any questions, we'll send it to the roundtables.
Once we build a home.
All right, questions, thoughts? Okay, so it is currently 9:34. Do you remember what time you said no was the clock? Yeah. You got it?
They have no idea. Once they sign off, the authority's gone.
All right, we're gonna wing it. Absolutely. Oh yeah, and if you want me to come chat before any of your boards, I will happily come and chat. I'm happy to either A, consult, or B, come give a presentation to any local government. We are going to give you until 9:50. Until 9:50, I'm gonna let you guys chat in your groups. Facilitators will have a packet that has some additional resources for you, and they're also going to be taking notes. I will also say that you will be receiving a document after this meeting with those resources, and I just had trouble with printing. And so, you're going to get it electronically, yes.
One question about the state regulations they're working on. How are they looking at, like, the UP is all on rock and northern Michigan is all sand and mud and clay? How is one regulation gonna take that encompassed into effect?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And the answer is that they are not planning to have a statewide sanitary code which would dictate things like setbacks. They're planning to leave those sort of geographic and geological considerations in the hands of the health department. And what they're planning to do instead is have an ordinance which requires either periodic or time of transfer inspection and pumping. And so allowing health departments to meet the needs of their community, use local knowledge of like, hey, look, everyone on this stretch of shoreline just has to pump their septic effluent uphill and over to where it's a good drain field. They're not going to start regulating that at the state level. That's going to stay with the health department. What they're trying to do is just create a overlay of everyone has to be inspected in some manner, and they're going to create a statewide database of all of the permits on file, which will help significantly with a number of other issues.
So compliance would be left at the local level?
Yes.
With that, how would they, if a house has got one person living in it, they're not gonna need to have their septic system pumped, let's say every 5 years. They may be able to get 10 or 15 years. Are they gonna have provisions in that bill for that? Because, like you said, the short-term rental one, they should actually be pumped on a regular basis, where a single-family home with one family in it, they may not need to get it pumped for 15 years.
Yeah, and I will say that has been specifically brought up, is the capacity question, and does it need to be, and the frequency of required pumping. And there's specific language in there, so it's still very much a working document, and it's gonna be worked on until February. The existing current language has a provision in it that allows, if it does not need to be pumped to perform the inspection because of low capacity or low occupancy, it does not need to be pumped. Or if it is a high capacity, smaller size system, it does not require more frequent pumping, but it does not punish individuals who have low capacity, who have low occupancy. So they're trying to make sure that that flexibility exists within the language, and to allow health departments to use their best judgment in the enforcement, while preventing the sort of arbitrary interpretation from health department to health department. That's a way balancing it.
Can you give us just a rough idea of between the costs for homeowners, because that's what's gonna come down in terms of pushback, if we do anything, between inspection and pump out?
Right. Casey, can I put you on the spot, or should I try to answer?
Put me on the spot. So right now
I'm Casey Clement. I'm with the Health Department of Northwest Michigan. Right now, our time of transfer evaluation is around $340. That does not include the cost of pumping. That cost of pumping is determined by your septic pumper. So the costs associated with that are like the volumes that they pump, if they have to dig, and if there's a winter fee.
So that's just the inspection?
That's just the inspection.
With $340, just have somebody come up and look at it.
Yes, and it also includes water samples.
Is that done by the health department, or is that done by a third party?
For us, for Milton Township, Village of Elk Rapids, and Torch Lake is our health department. We don't have third-party inspectors.
So while she's got the microphone, if I may just tag team, what's included in your inspection? Okay, so, some of the early questions I had while this program was being developed was, we weren't testing the effluent water to see if the septic tank is actually working, right?
Correct.
And so, has that changed in Milton Township or in
No,
your
we do not test,
jurisdiction?
we do not test effluent.
So what are we accomplishing in the inspection? That there's a square tank in the ground and pipe comes in and pipe goes out?
Do you have any annual reports?
Not on hand.
So I'm seeing Milton's, I'm very familiar with Milton's, annual reports. So, but none of those reports actually describe what
What
was
the
being
process is.
accomplished in the inspection.
Okay, well, I can do a quick overview of what I do when I go out there. That's what
Okay.
you're looking for.
Oh, yeah, that's a good.
Okay.
Casey, did you know we were gonna do the
I did not know. Good thing I had a
Why
cup
don't
of
you
coffee.
stand up? Can you take the stage for us too? Come on, full effect.
I can feel myself turning bright red. We're just gonna go with it. So when I do a time and transfer inspection, we're looking at the water supply as well as the wastewater system.
Okay.
So for the water supply, we look at the wellhead, see if it's in good condition. And then if it's accessible, look at the pressure tank, pressure gauge, pressure switch. And we also take a water sample. So with the water sample, we're looking for coliform bacteria or E. coli, as well as nitrates, because they're the human health concern. For the septic inspection, we're looking at one, where the septic is located. That includes the tank as well as the drain field or drywall or block trench, whatever they have. If that tank is accessible, we'll look in the tank to see if there's any signs of failure, if there's a baffle present, and then we try to find the drain field via probing. So if we find the drain field, we confirm the drain field dimensions to get your square feet. So under our district sanitary code, we size our drain fields based on the soil conditions as well as the number of bedrooms in the home. So once we find the drain field, we get the dimensions, that tells us our square feet. We do a borehole into the drain field to see if there are any signs of failure. And then we do,
Specifically, what would indicate signs of failure?
So signs-
Didn't mean to interrupt.
no, you're fine. Feel free to ask questions. Signs of failure would be if
Color
that
of soil.
color, right? If it comes back black, smeary, if there's standing effluent in there. And then we do a soil boring adjacent to the drain field to check native soil and groundwater conditions. And from there, we can determine the drain field isolation to seasonal high groundwater. And if surface water is also present, we get a measurement from the septic to surface water and septic to the well. So then with the report, we go through and match up, is it adequate for the house, is it undersized, is it not adequately isolated to groundwater, are there signs of failure? And then if or when this drain field needs to be replaced, what that drain field would look like. Is there room on site, is there limitations? Would we be able to permit something for like new construction, or maybe as the existing house is?
So for us in Grand Traverse, we already have all of that documentation with the parcel ID. Does that not exist in Antrim County?
I
So,
don't know.
in other words, any taxable parcel in Grand Traverse County, I can call and get a map of where the septic tank is, what its size is, where the wellhead's located, and where the drain field is at.
So you can do a record search through our department to see if there are any records on file for the property. And then, I'll put Terry on the spot. I heard that we might be digitizing records. in Antrim.
What?
I heard that
Yes,
Antrim County.
They're trying to digitize everything, but there, I don't, not saying that that's not the case, but I would hazard to guess that there are septic tanks in every county in the state of Michigan that nobody knows is even there.
Yeah.
Because they're old and they're just, nobody's had any records of them.
And that's part of the reason for the statewide database, is to identify the parcels that do not currently have that information. And that's been part of some health departments do have digitized records and some do not. And so specifically for Antrim, there are many parcels where you cannot access that information.
Sure, okay.
Okay.
I didn't interrupt.
Oh, no, you're fine. Feel free to ask.
This is maybe a group question. Do those records of the drinking water testing go into an equal database?
They do not go into a database. So those records are included with that report for that property, but we don't have a county database of what those water sample results are.
I'll
So if
make
there was
you-
some kind of a
I'll let you
cluster
get off
of
the
feminized
hot
drinking
seat.
water, for example, that would be,
Thank you.
would we be able to find that out by searching a county database? And is that information collected somewhere, or does it just stay with the homeowner's records and not go any further?
So right now it just stays with the homeowner's records. So we know there are areas.
Wait, isn't there a statewide database now of wells?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, so there's well logic where you can look at, like well location, well depth,
Right.
but it does not include water sample results, if that's what you're looking for.
I want to share with you, from a homeowner's perspective. 2 years ago, we sold a piece of property, had a septic system, Antrim County, called the health department. Casey came out, it's in the village of Elk Rapid. Casey came out and did this inspection. We had to have the tank pumped out. It was a 1,500 gallon, we're getting comments from the back, cheap seats back there. It was a 1,500 gallon tank, and it cost about $260, I recall, to actually pump ahead of you coming out. And of course, it wasn't 1,500 gallons that they pumped. I think it was around 300 gallons. But in any event, as a homeowner, I was concerned because the sale was going to be hinged upon this. So when Casey came out, they had record, which was a sketch basically on the back of an envelope from 1987, which isn't that long ago. So 1987, there was this sketch. Had the dimensions off the corner of the home. We don't have a well, so that wasn't an issue as to where the well was located, the shoreline, how far from the shore were we. But these sketches that they had at the health department were really pretty simple. And when we talk, Ron, you asked about getting these pieces of information, how accurate are they? On the sketch, it showed the drain field sort of going out in one direction, and as they probed around looking for the drain field, there's no drain field in this area. Like go 90 degrees from what it showed on the sketch, and yeah, here's where it may be. Took the samples. Then you and your cohort went out further on the property from the home and evaluated whether the conditions in another location for the future would be appropriate to put in another septic system, if this one had to be replaced. So I think it was very thorough. The thing I like about what's been done in all the ordinances around here and what Casey does, you go out and you take the water sample if there's a well. And that's very important because that's another indicator. So when Ron, you ask about what do they check, the quality of what's in the septic, no, but what's in a well is even more critical to me if I'm on a well. And that's why you have spacing regulations between where a septic system and a drain field is and where the wells might be. So anyway, thank you.
Well, it is now 9:50. So I'm going to give you 10 more minutes. So 10 minutes discussion at your tables, and then we're going to let Noah come up and talk about shorelines. We'll have another discussion and then a break. Sounds good? All right, head and chat.